about with efficacious technique. Humor. Complex rhythms. Ephebism. Ephebism is when you see vitality where you don't expect it, where you have a group of individuals who have been oppressed or suppressed in some way, but they still are able to find a vitality within themselves. That's what ephebism is. Or a lot of times in a show, and you can see this in the movie Tap, where the character played by Sammy Davis Jr., he walks in with his cane and he tosses his cane to his friend and says, "Hold this for me." And then he riffs off this, really wonderful dance tap sequence. That's an example of ephebism. So all of these together create the African sensibility in this particular piece. And there are more. Art intelligence, where the art knows you're participating in it and it's going to affect you. Like Bernice Regan of Sweet Honey the Rock talks about, we sing songs to run that energy through us. Here we have individual stylization, where the Temptation Walk, right, or the MC Hammer's movements. You have 5 people doing it, and each one will have their own little style in doing that particular step. Correct entrance and exit, that's really apparent in hip hop, where we have people stepping in and stepping out at the appropriate time. You don't step in on another dancer. And of course, innovating the tradition, changing what's there, adding something else, which is what Frankie Manning did. So I'm gonna play just a little bit of this, and I want you to watch for some of these things I just mentioned. Okay, so in this part of the lecture, I'm going to continue on with the African American aesthetic. In the previous parts, I talked about why it's important for us to go through this scholarship, into the scholarship. I talked about various aspects of the aesthetic, and I'm going to continue on, but in a different way. I'm going to talk about the function and the psychology of the African American aesthetic. So let's talk about competitive camaraderie. There are 2 concepts of competition. Well, there are many, many concepts of competition. One is called finite, and that's where you win to dominate. You win to finish everything off. The other type of competition is that you play to keep playing. It's infinite. And those terms come from James Cars, who's a historian, finite and infinite games. And for the African American tradition, competitive camaraderie sits inside of infinite games. You play to keep playing. You want your opponent to be so good that you grow. So you grow with the competition, and hopefully your partner or your competitor grows too, so you can keep competing. So competitive camaraderie. Now, aesthetic of the cool. Now, not everyone can appreciate this person, maybe because of their political alliances or whatnot, but he is the epitome of cool, as is the other, or are the 7 other that Ebony put on their cover in 2008. So each one of these individuals has a sense of coolness, and cool is unruffled nature, has a sense of spirituality. Celebrating virtuosity. It's not quite flaunting virtuosity, but it's close. Let's take a look at Muhammad Ali. His professional theme was, "I am the greatest. I am the greatest." And that's one way of flaunting or celebrating your, I was going to say celebrating your virtuosity. It also did many other things. I mean, it really taunted, it played with his opponents. James Brown, he has a song called "I've Got Soul and I'm Super Bad." Right? And in the song, he talks about how he steps back and he just wants to kiss himself, that he's so bad. Right? And of course, we have Chuck Berry. If you can do the splits while you're playing the guitar and get out of the splits, why not? And there we go with Chuck Berry.
You can't touch this. You can't touch this.
right? MC Hammer, can't touch this. Again, it's this concept of walking with, knowing you're good and not hiding it, not necessarily hiding it. There's the blues. The blues has a function. The blues has a structure to it, but it's also a function. And I'm going to talk about 6 different functions related to the blues. The first one, it's an art expression. It's a vernacular art expression. People are able to engage in the arts, what I talked about earlier, art intelligence, and that the music will do something to you. So it's a way of participating in the arts. It is an orator. It imparts wisdom to people and to the singer. I want you to listen to this one song by Son House. It's a fairly famous song. A lot of people know this one. Just listen to the advice that's given in this song.
Don't you mind people grinning in your face? Don't mind people grinning in your face. Yeah, just bear this in mind. A true friend is hard to find. Don't you mind people grinning in your face? You know.
Piece of wisdom. A piece of wisdom. Of course, the song goes on to talk about different scenarios in which you shouldn't mind people grinning in your face. So with that, connected to that, there's also a catharsis where you can take frustration and anger and pain and history and protest, and you can readjust your psyche using the blues. And it's a form of tension where you gather the tension up and then you release it. Sometimes you have to increase the tension before you can actually release it. The fourth thing that I'm going to talk about with the blues, fourth function of the blues, of this aesthetic, is that you can speak uninhibited truth. And it could be the trials of incarceration. And it can be a woman leaving or a man leaving. And blues doesn't have to just be in music. Blues women use song, but also go beyond song. They speak of uninhibited truths, of rape, actually multiple rapes, of incest, of forced prostitution, of perceived physical ugliness. Here we have Edmonia Lewis, who sculpted Hagar, who was a slave woman who had been raped multiple times. She sculpted that in 1868. Alice Walker with The Color Purple, Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eye, and Kara Walker, who has her shadow cutouts. When you first look at these shadow cutouts, you think, oh, this is kind of playful. And then you realize that this young girl is being raped. This little baby is being raped. And her brother is looking on and being played with also with this man. So she is speaking uninhibited truths. And what happens is that other women can say, me too, even silently to themselves or out loud. And it speaks for others. I think these blues women sort of speak for the mute of the world, for the women who cannot speak forward. These women speak. So in that way, they're definitely part of the blues aesthetic. Celebration, which is the fifth thing. Terry McMillan's Waiting to Exhale stimulated thousands and thousands of women all over the world, I cannot tell you how many Waiting to Exhale parties I went to. I had one myself because we could identify with one of those women, in this story. So in many ways, Terry McMillan is a blues author who is writing our stories, the ones that we cannot tell. You can also talk about your lover. Talk about either yourself as a phenomenal lover or your lover and his or her skills. And we're going to hear Alberta Hunter talk for a moment about her handyman.
Now, whoever said a good man was hard to find, positively, absolutely sure was blind. Because I've just found the best man that ever was, and here's just a few of the things that he does. He shakes my ashes, greases my griddle, churns my butter, and he strokes my fiddle. Oh, my man is such a handy man.
yes? Now, if we had more time, I'd have you write a few verses. My man or woman blanks my blank, and you have to fill in the blank, right? So if we had more time, we would do that. So definitely you are talking about something you wouldn't just walk down the street and say, but she's saying it very metaphorically. Now, this is the fifth part of this lecture, and I'm going to talk about people, when I give this lecture, people come up to me and they say, oh, that's my culture too. Like, African Americans do not have the corner on tragedy and resiliency, trickster, or the concept of cool. You know, I'm Jewish, or I'm Mexican, or I am, you know, Japanese. And we have that same concept. And here I'm going to introduce the work of Adolphe Bastillon and Joseph Campbell. I was introduced to his work by Joseph Campbell. He talked about two things. One is an elementary idea, and the other is a folk idea. And the elementary idea is in every single culture, every single one. So a trickster is in every single culture. We have the leprechaun, we have Mercury, we have Legba, we have the fox, we have the raven. These are tricksters in different cultures. Or every culture has a sense of cool. Every single one does. But cool in the Africanist sensibility is affected by other tenets. And that's how you can discern cool from one culture to the other, are the other tenets or elements that affect it. For example, black cool is shaped by a distinct set of tenets. Admiration of the black body, which I now say black-brown body, balanced asymmetry, sacred and secular, celebrating virtuosity. So let's go back to balanced asymmetry. So if you think of aristocratic cool in England, this is cool in England, and it's usually symmetrical. Aristocratic cool is usually symmetrical. Military cool is a little bit wider and a little bit bigger. Yes, this is military cool, but it tends to be symmetrical. But when we look at African American cool, it's asymmetrical. You're usually standing back on one leg. It's showing that you're comfortable in your skin, you're connected to your spirituality. Right? So it's very, very, very different. But as you can see, cool is in every single culture. But also, if you look, cool has traveled into the Americas and into Europe. So that cool is definitely spreading. We're going to look at another tenet, loud, the tenet of loud. This lady has wonderful, wonderful hair, right? And she has dyed it to this wonderful, wonderful, fabulous color. And she knows that she is looking good. She is saying, I, separate from the establishment. I, separate from the establishment. However, he is saying something else. He is saying, I in all my splendor, right? He's saying, I in all my splendor. When somebody walks in, you can just tell by the smile on his face that he's very, very happy with his outfit. He's very happy with it. And I agree with both of them. But they're saying different things. So here, therefore, the tenet loud operates in both culture, but it looks different, and it's going to function differently. So the other reason why I think other people say that the arts are, that these things are sitting in their culture is that the art that they're looking at has Africanist traditions or roots within itself. Let's take a look at George Gershwin's work. Specifically, let's look at Porgy and Bess. This is what Michael Tilson Thomas said about George Gershwin. He took the Jewish tradition, the African American tradition, and the symphonic tradition, and he made a language out of that which was accessible and understandable to all kinds of people. George Gershwin grew up in New York, and he grew up with black folks, and he grew up with those rhythms. And he was very, very interested in incorporating those rhythms into what he knew also. Let's look at Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller. And of course, we recognize the man in the middle. This is Elvis Presley. Jerry Leiber wrote, I was brought up in black neighborhoods in South Baltimore, and we really felt like we were very black. We acted black and we spoke black. When I was a kid growing up, where I came from, it was hip to be black. To be white was kind of square. Teenagers especially are very conscious about what is lame and what is hip and what is square, And I grew up right in the middle of a black culture. I knew dead on what it was firsthand. He is a songwriter. Both of them are songwriters, and they have written fabulous songs that you all know. Stand By Me, Jailhouse Rock, and another one called Hound Dog. Hound Dog was one of their first, not the first, but one of their first songs that they put on top of, or they had a black singer singing. We know Elvis Presley to sing Hound Dog, right? We know, most of us know that version. That is not who they wrote Hound Dog for. They wrote Hound Dog for this woman, Big Mama Thornton. And they heard her voice and wanted to write for her blues sensibility. So they gave her this music, and she added her own sensibility, her own blues sensibility, which matured the song in a way.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog, been snooping around my door. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, been snooping around my door. You can wag your tail, but I ain't gonna feed you no more.
Very different than Elvis Presley's version. And this is what they originally wrote, right? With the help of Big Mama Thornton as the performer, as the singer. She did what we call creative adjustment. She added in small timing changes and small barking and things like that into the song, which if you hear the whole song, you can hear the barking, and sort of as a joke on, play on the your hound dog. When you do this research, you'll reveal not only an African American aesthetic, but also a Black America. You're going to see it. So what I want you to think of, well, why are we looking at this Black America? How did that happen? Well, it started very early on with the concept of modernity, and that happened in the late 1800s, early 1900s, where people wanted to be progressive. They were trying, especially in the United States, they were trying to find the hip thing to do, the hip thing to be, and they looked at jazz and the dances that came out of jazz as a place. It's not just here in the United States. In Germany, they wanted to dance the cakewalk. In Russia, they wanted to dance the cakewalk. In the Netherlands, the foxtrot, and the shimmy in France and in Germany. So all over the world, there was this new sense of what is hip, what is cool, and what is the most current avant-garde thing to participate in. And the African American tradition was one of those things. So we're going to continue to look at the avenues of entry into mainstream America. One was just watching. Folks just watched one another, right? Fusion techniques began to happen. And then there's the imitation of each other, which happens through minstrelsy and blackface, which had its very, very, very harmful and degrading sensibility to it. And at the same time, it had European Americans going into the African American to try to figure out what is the African American, to be able to duplicate it in performance, but unfortunately in a derogatory way, but it was an avenue for folks to approach the African American aesthetic. Another one was just playing, this is Benny Goodwin, just playing with African American performers, great, great, great performers. Then the dances, I talked about this. The cakewalk, which is a dance, is a plantation dance, started off as African Americans making fun of their plantation owners not knowing that this was a mockery on them, thought it was a great dance, wanted to dance it themselves. Other dances come through, the Charleston, which was a social dance that was taken to the club, but people wanted to dance the Charleston, and the same thing with the twist. So this is one of the ways that Africanisms become part of America. Another one is when, well, I'll show you.
I found a dream that I can speak to, a dream that I can call my own. I found a thrill to press my cheek to, a thrill
I've never known.
you smile.
I found a thrill to press my cheek to, a thrill that I have never known. Oh yeah,
on the left was the original song. Etta James took it and took it to a whole new place. Right? So it's an African American. She put in, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in this class. She, not in this class, but in the course, she took African sensibilities and layered it into that particular song. So soon, with this kind of scholarship, you'll be able to see African American aesthetics on detour, meaning not directly. Let's take a look at Fred Astaire, the great Fred Astaire. When I first saw this picture, I thought of the Nicholas brothers right away. But you also have to look deeper and look back to his choreographer, Hermes Pan. Hermes Pan was Fred Astaire's choreographer, and he would go home. He was part of a very wealthy family, and he would go home occasionally with his caretaker, with a domestic that took care of him. And the domestic lived in Black Bottom, Memphis, Tennessee. And he would play with the kids on the street, all the black kids in the street. And so this is what Hermes Pan says of his choreography and the work of Fred Astaire. Reflecting on his career, Hermes Pan, he acknowledged that the dancing that the world knew as Fred Astaire was mainly African in its roots. Astaire was very drawn to percussive sounds and rhythms. The movements and ideas that Hermes brought to the dance floor for Fred Astaire were those he'd learned and he had acquired as a small child in Black Bottom, thanks to his mammy and the black boys who played gut bucket jazz in the streets. So we begin to look, I look now at Fred Astaire very differently than I looked at him in the past. Looking at Picasso and his famous painting, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, very much influenced by African masks, right, in France, that he found sitting in France. So as we continue to look back again at Jacob Lawrence's Shoemaker from the Migration series, we begin to see the elements. And so we have clarity about what is sitting inside of this picture that makes it Africanist. And why is this important? Cultural currency. Cultural currency. We can give credit to a particular culture, a particular aesthetic. So we have also an intelligence. And so when we look at something like this, Mickey Mouse as a minstrel character, which is based on negrophobia and also negrophilia, it's based on both, we can see that we can sort of dissolve that in our mind, and that these structures of negrophobia and negrophilia begin to break away and fall apart. And what's going to come up in its place is a more accurate depiction of blackness. This is Jeff Donaldson, Wives of Shango. And this is Jean-Michel Basquiat, his painting.
Out on my way to Harlem. Ellington, you don't live around here. He moved away one day, so they say, from Harlem. I can hear his echo still. Now, you can't keep me away from where I was born.
So it's a journey. I believe that there is something special about blackness, and that this specialness manifests itself in distinct ways. I want to know more about this distinction. I want to know what makes something black. And I firmly, firmly believe, along with many other authors, that talking about it will make a difference.
From where I was born, I was baptized by my daddy's horn. No, you can't keep me away from where I was born. I was baptized to the sound of horn. Oh.